again, just to be completely transparent about my biases, I spent a good chunk of graduate school learning about the science of survey design, and eventually that led to my working for a little startup company called Panorama Education. So this company provides a lot of survey tools and instruments, and I guess I would say that in the abstract, I don't think it matters a ton whether you sort of outsource these survey scales or not, except that there's so much to be known about surveys. I think in a lot of ways, it's a little like teaching, right? So if you talk to anyone who's not a teacher, it just doesn't seem that hard to them. Like, you stand up in the front of the class, you sort of go through the content, somehow the kids learn this. There's just not that much to it. Like, that's kind of the average non-educator impression of teaching. And in the same, and like, everyone's been a student, so it seems really intuitive. And in very much the same way, everyone's taken a survey. It's some items, there are some response options, it just doesn't seem that hard. But it turns out, once you sort of get into it, there are a ton of decisions, many of which have sort of right and wrong answers. And so, should you ask questions or should you pose statements? Do you want 5 response options, or 4 or 7 or 6? Do you want to have all your response options be in this agree-disagree form so that they're all the same and people can move through the survey more quickly? Turns out, absolutely not. Like, you don't want to do that. So all those types of things, I think if a school district has someone on board who really knows this science quite well, it would make a lot of sense for them to sort of lead a process where teachers gave some input into what they wanted to see measured, and then the sort of local expert could kind of tailor some of those measures. In the absence of that expert, though, I think looking around for some external instruments and some companies that might be able to provide sort of good, useful feedback, I think the return on investment for that is it's probably just not worth the school's time to try and figure that out if they don't just happen to have that expertise in-house already. So I think in terms of the ability to measure these things, I'm very bullish, optimistic. I think surveys are a great tool for that. At the end of the day, if you want to know if someone's motivated, like, yes, you could look at all these sort of external behaviors, but those are sort of proxies for this internal state, which is what we know motivation to be, right? It's this combination of goals and self-confidence, of efficacy, of emotion, of an energizing force. So it's that combination of things which are all internal psychological states. And the behaviors that we might observe are sort of secondary. Those are the external manifestations. And there's ways in which we might think that, like, people's self-reports are going to be unreliable, but there's certainly a lot of ways in which people's behaviors are unreliable and not synced tight or tightly yoked with what their internal psychological state is. So in a lot of ways, I think we have no better technology available besides surveys to get at whether people feel socially connected, whether they feel motivated. The emotion regulation, I'm a little more, I think the behavioral observation measures are quite effective there too. But, something like learning strategies, how they're thinking about some of their emotion regulation pieces, I think surveys are quite effective there too. I'm just more bullish on the behavioral observations in that domain. So I think if what you want to do is help a student sort of begin to develop some metacognitive capacity around, like, how much effort are they putting in, what are their grades that are coming out, how could they be more strategic in their learning, I think a survey that maybe even had some open-ended responses so that they could comment on data that you're feeding back to them would be a fabulous tool to help them develop these capacities. And you might want to see it in different subject areas. On the other hand, if you're in a school that has much more integrated curricula and project-based learning happening all the time, maybe the school structure is better that students have an advisory period where they can kind of step back and reflect on themselves broadly as a learner and begin to integrate, like, geez, things are going really poorly in math, but really well in social studies. What's going on over here that's not going on here? How can I take the good stuff from here and apply it to the math setting? So again, I think it depends a lot on what the takeaways that you want your students to get are, and what the school structure is, what makes the most sense for that. And then I guess the other huge thing is it depends on the teacher professional development that you want to instill. So in a lot of ways, my hope for Panorama, the thing I think we're really well positioned to do, is to become this very personalized, very individualized teacher professional development company, so that we can give teachers feedback on, hey, here's where your teacher-student relationships are, here's how engaging students are finding class, here's student self-efficacy, here's kind of where they're at on their learning strategies, here's their sense of belonging, here's the classroom climate. We're giving you a readout in October. We're going to give you another readout in March. We're going to work with you and just sort of brainstorm. Ultimately, you're the best arbiter of what you need, but we're going to provide you data. You're going to think of strategies. We're going to give you some ideas to help brainstorm that. And we'll be able to track over time if you're making good progress on these different dimensions. Maybe you're doing great with all the girls in your classroom, and it's the boys that are really problematic. Our data are going to be able to sort of pinpoint that for you. And then you want to tailor your strategies around engagement for boys, maybe. So I think there's a huge potential for really good teacher professional development to come out of the assessment of social emotional learning. But again, it really depends on the school's press. And if they want to make these things classroom specific, then I think you empower, enable, and facilitate the teacher professional development angle of it. If your interests are more in sort of reshaping and retooling school culture, then maybe you're just getting school level feedback and getting teachers' input on, how should we think about this data collectively? What should we each be doing? What's our role? And I guess the final quick thing I'll say on this is I think a lot of this also depends on the political climate at the school. So if there's a really strong, and we actually have very similar sort of social emotional learning survey tools for teachers, and it talks about teacher-administrator relationships. And so if those are strong, I think you've got a great possibility for really sort of pushing the development of teachers forward. And if those, and doing sort of more classroom level stuff. And if the teachers really don't trust the administrators, then I think you want to keep everything at the school level so that teachers are not feeling like this is somehow going to be used to attack them.